Welcome to the Plant Fit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Margot Freitag. Margot is a plant-based nutrition consultant, massage therapist, certified personal trainer, and the founder of Tiger Whole Health. We start the conversation with Margot sharing about how foods can affect your hormonal balance. Enjoy the presentation.
Oh, that's a really interesting topic because especially for women my age, where I'm in that menopausal space right now, and I noticed that foods have made a huge impact and on my hormones during this time. And when I see women's really struggling with menopause, I can't help but wonder what they're eating. Because we know that in some countries, in Asia, for example, Japan, women really don't experience menopause. They don't experience menopausal symptoms, I should say, like we do in North America. And largely, at least historically, I'm not sure what's happening now with how things are changing, but historically they've eaten a plant-based sort of diet with some fish. And of course, here we have so many high-fat foods, and so many foods that are not that don't promote a healthy hormone balance. And so a couple of the things that I really noticed was including soy in my diet has made a huge difference. So it seems to have balanced the estrogen, the changes in estrogen, and I actually don't feel anything. I know it's happening, but I don't really feel very much. So I think soy is a really important one. And other foods that have phytoestrogens in them are really good. Flax seeds, for example, and edamame, which is soy, sweet potato, and all of the just starchy vegetables, all of the greens, all of these foods are going to help us with our hormone balance because especially at this time of life, it's so important. And for younger women, premenstrual syndrome symptoms can really be abated by lower sugar, lower processed foods in our diet, and higher fiber rich foods, lots of colorful fiber rich foods. So I think that's a really important piece that's made a big difference for me.
For sure, as I said earlier, Margot, you look absolutely radiant. So whatever you're doing is working really, really well. I really want to get into what you said earlier about high-fat foods. And specifically high-fat foods, maybe you can go through a few different foods that are the worst foods that contribute to hormonal imbalances.
The first thing I think is really important with high-fat diets is when women put on extra weight, that the extra fat that they're carrying actually makes a huge impact on their hormone balance because, as you probably know, Luke, fat actually produces its own estrogen-like hormones. And so we actually have higher estrogen levels in our body when we are carrying excess weight. So that's the first thing, just having extra fat in our diet and having fatty foods in our diet that make us gain weight really do play a role because our own fat is producing extra hormone-like substances that wreak havoc on our hormone balance. Of course, the fried foods and the trans fats really play the worst. They're the worst culprits. The healthy fats are really important because we need to balance our omega-3 to 6 ratio, and that's going to help us with our mood and stabilize our hormone levels. And so those kinds of things, those healthy fats are obviously good fats. Flax seeds, I think I already mentioned flax seeds earlier, avocado, even, all of those healthy fats in their whole food form, of course, are really important. I'm even an advocate of walnuts and Brazil nuts. I think the trans fats and of course the fatty, the deep fried foods really do wreak havoc on our hormones.
So in terms of animal protein, how does that contribute to hormonal imbalances?
Of course, the animal foods that contain high fats, saturated fat in dairy products and in eggs, these fats are saturated. Of course, they're not good for us anyway, but they do come packaged, prepackaged with a lot of estrogen because, of course, dairy specifically is the culprit. Um, Cows are milked through their pregnancy. End stage pregnant cow milk is, I think, 33 times higher in estrogen than non-pregnant cow milk. So there's a lot of estrogen that comes prepackaged in dairy products because, of course, the dairy is pooled, and so all those hormones are mixed in. So dairy plays a big role in wreaking havoc on our hormones and adds a ton of animal estrogen, which of course is a huge piece. I mean, it's funny when people say to me they don't want the estrogens in soy, but they consume dairy. I mean, we're talking about phytoestrogens that are actually helpful and beneficial, as opposed to animal estrogens they behave in our body as they are, which is animal estrogens. We are animals, and so it's just adding more of those estrogens into our body we really don't need.
Where soy is concerned, I think some people are still worried about the GMO soy. Is there anything to be concerned about?
That we have to lay this to rest. I mean, we know that soy is beneficial. It protects us. It's protective against breast cancer. It's protective against other hormone-related cancers. And of course, we want to stay away from genetically modified soy, which I believe is now worldwide not allowed to be sold for human consumption, at least in North America. Luke, I don't know where you are if GMO soy is still allowed. Do you know?
No, we're in Singapore, and the soy milk that I get actually says non-GMO Canadian soya beans. So in
Oh,
terms of the tofu that we get, it doesn't really say non-GMO, but I would assume they are. We normally buy the organic sprouted version anyway, and it costs like $2. So
yeah,
because soy is so common here, it's actually
right.
really accessible.
So you probably don't have the same concerns over there that the North Americans have. Yeah, so soy really is protective. It's really beneficial. Of course, we want to avoid genetically modified soy, which I believe is not that hard to avoid anymore because it's not really allowed to be sold here anywhere. But also we want to avoid soy protein isolates, right? So these are the isolated proteins in processed foods where they take out the protein of the soy and they add it to the ingredients. And of course, that can actually raise IGF-1 levels in the same way that meat can raise IGF-1 levels. We want to avoid soy protein isolates because they will increase levels of IGF-1, circulating IGF-1, just in the same way that meat will increase IGF-1 levels. And IGF-1, of course, is insulin-like growth factor. And of course, cancerous tumors have IGF-1 receptors on their surface. And so IGF-1 is a growth factor. It makes things grow really quickly. Lots of it in dairy, or lots of, I guess not lots of it in dairy, but when we consume dairy, our levels of IGF-1 really increase. And with all of the other culprits involved, we just don't need to be increasing our IGF-1 levels unnecessarily. So avoiding soy protein isolate is going to be important. So just look for whole first generation soy products. So whole edamame, soy milk, organic, obviously soy milk, tofu, tempeh, and you're good to go. Just try to avoid the processed soy products. And this is a really fascinating story. I had asthma pretty significantly my whole life since I was about 4 years old. I was hospitalized a lot, lots of emergency room visits, and I really struggled also with my weight and my health in every other conceivable way. And when I finally was in my 20s studying to become a massage therapist, in my program, I had to take a nutrition course, and it just so happened, it was like a full semester course. Brenda Davis was my nutrition teacher. And so that was fantastic. And she was the first person who really talked about, the idea that some foods can make you healthy, and some foods can make you sick. And so I knew what we needed to do. I didn't really make the changes right away, but I started to make the changes. And by the time I was in my 30s, I was completely dairy free. And when I removed dairy, that was when the biggest change happened. But it wasn't, it didn't clear things up entirely. I gave up meat, eggs, dairy, and I was still experienced some lingering effects of asthma. And I could actually tell just by the foods that I was eating what was causing them. And it turned out to be things like artificial color, artificial flavor, anything that had MSG in it, and then some alcohol like wine. If I had a glass of wine or anything else sort of fermented, maybe, musty or moldy like wine. So those things, I was able to actually completely eradicate a lifetime battle with asthma just by changing my diet. And it has since become probably the greatest tool for me. It was always a horrible thing to have asthma, but it tells me a lot. If I start having trouble breathing, it's usually because of something I've eaten or something in the environment. And it's just been a fascinating journey to discover that I could actually fully take control of my health that way. And it's been particularly important during this whole coronavirus pandemic, because having healthy lungs is so important. So I've been sharing that, these tidbits with a lot of people.
And with this whole coronavirus, with people locked down, I think they're out of sync of their routine, out of sync with their eating habits as well. And my understanding is that, because you're in that situation where you're just emotionally depressed, you might reach for certain foods that you don't normally reach for. So where that's concerned, how can people tell if cravings are actually fooling them?
Well, that's a huge topic, and so much to talk about around that. But as we do all know from Dr. Lyle's work, that cravings can be associated with memory, or you usually are associated with memory. So the longer you stay away from that given thing, the less you're going to crave it. And I can attest to the fact that that's true. I mean, there are things I used to love and I couldn't imagine ever giving up, and now I can't even imagine having them. So it's gone. It's out of my life. So that's the first thing, is that cravings are associated with memory. We also crave, sugar and fat and salt, and of course all the processed food. The chip companies and candy companies, they have figured out exactly what's going to give us the most powerful dopamine response, and that's how they keep us hooked. And so I think that what's really important is staying away from those things. But of course, sometimes they sneak in, right? And I think the biggest thing is to be able to identify what's going on. And then it becomes a behavioral or habitual practice to be able to stop, identify what it is you really need. And usually it's boredom or self-soothing or, something like that. And then shifting, like, how do we shift away from that without beating ourselves up? Because people really struggle with that whole idea of perfection, right? They think they fell off the wagon, they've got to get it right. And so they're going to hop back on the wagon tomorrow or Monday. And so there's this on and off again kind of mentality that comes into play. And I just encourage people to understand that you're human, that you're going to fall prey sometimes to these things, these processed foods that are so highly addictive. And if we can just shift in that moment and be gentle with ourselves and just decide that the next thing that we have is going to be healthy.
I picked up a few things there, and yeah, with food that exists, it's meant to pull us in. It's meant to get us addicted. I mean, you mentioned dairy earlier, and in Singapore, there's things like bubble tea everywhere. Firstly, Asians were not designed to consume dairy. I mean, any human for that matter. But now they're starting to put cheese in the tea. So that's a whole different dimension altogether. And I'm starting to see a lot of my fellow countrymen with autoimmune conditions, with eczema, and which is just a sign of an issue in the body. So where that's concerned, people talk about moderation, having maybe a bubble tea with cheese once a week, or maybe having animal protein once a day. Or what's your take on moderation?
Moderation can be useful for some people. But if you're trying to reverse a disease like heart disease or diabetes or an autoimmune disease, there really isn't room for moderation. I mean, at least in the moment, right? I'm very, I don't want to say strict because it doesn't feel strict. It's just the way I eat. It wouldn't occur to me to eat dairy or meat or, but sometimes I have a treat, a vegan treat, and that would be kind of my practice of moderation. It would be moderately having some sort of vegan treat now and again. But as far as people who are trying to make a change and they feel that this change is too hard, it's too extreme, then I think there's room for moderation, because the idea here is we're trying to get people to eat more plants. Yes. Is it great to be fully plant-based? Of course, yes, it is. Is it impossible for you? Well, if it's impossible for you, then do the best you can. Just eat more plants and try to squeeze out the bad by adding in more of the good. And that might be different for everybody. Moderation, I think, has to be, it's an individual tailoring. It's a practice that's going to be very individual, because listen, if we're too hard on people, if we tell people they can never have oil or they can't ever have anything that they loved, then they might not try at all. And the goal here is to get people to try, right? If you can't do it, if you just can't do it, giving up because you can't be perfect is not ideal either. So I think we have to be flexible in allowing people to add a little bit of something in if that's what makes it work.
What I know is for people that move, say, from a plant-based, from an animal-based diet, a non-plant-based diet to a plant-based diet, I mean, the microbiome actually shifts because they've been eating a certain way for all their lives. So the experience that some people actually have by moving to a plant-based diet is that the microbiome isn't ready for all that fiber. And I understand that you coach women through transition. What has your experience been with some of your clients when, all of a sudden they move to eating more fiber and the gut just can't handle it?
It's funny because I have had people who just go for it with beans because they're so afraid of not getting enough protein. And so we have to have that protein conversation a lot because people are so worried about protein. So I have seen this, I've seen it several times, many times, where people just start eating a lot of, mostly I see it with beans and then some cruciferous vegetables, things like cabbage. But I think the big key here is to just start small. I mean, even if it's just a little bit of hummus or a few chickpeas on the top of your salad, just starting off small, because yes, beans especially can really cause bloating and discomfort. And I think, the real conversation here is not about, the trouble with adding more fiber, but the mindset around being worried about protein and adding in all of these. It's usually beans. It's usually that I see. Very fiber rich, but can cause the bloating and the gassiness. So, I mean, if we can just get people to understand that they're not going to fall apart because they're not getting, 55 grams of protein or whatever that is, that it's fine. It's just fine to start off with just a little bit here and there.
I agree, because I started off my whole plant-based journey with about 160 grams of plant protein because I flipped overnight. So I just took beans, and my goodness, It wasn't fun at all. What I want to ask is, it's for me, it's taken many years, and I'm sure for you to reach a point where you can almost trust your body and eat intuitively. And many people want to reach that point. So how can someone start learning to be more intuitive with their hunger signals, with their cravings?
People have ignored their bodies for so long, often when they come to me, that they don't even know what their body's saying. They don't trust their body. They've been defying and ignoring the cues. They don't know what the cues are anymore. And they want to know. They want to listen. They want to be tuned in. So what do? Well, you have to understand that it's one thing to be listening to the cue that you need the chocolate cake, right? I mean, that's a cue, but it's not, the reality is that's not really what your body is asking for. So if people are craving sugar, I usually tell them it's probably because you're not eating enough fruit, or enough carbohydrates, right? If people are really, and often the other part of that is often people are thirsty. They're not drinking enough water. So I think what's really important is if people can just start asking themselves how they feel when it's not mealtime, when it's not hunger time, and to tune into, just, with a meditative or mindfulness practice, tune into their body and start listening. Just have a few moments in the day where you're listening to your body and what it feels like. And so, yeah, for example, if you are craving sugar, try having some fruit. If you're craving just junk food or salt, try having some water. You might be thirsty. And if you are hungry and you understand that you are hungry, stop for a moment and sit with the hunger. Just sit with it and identify what it feels like in your body to experience that hunger. What is your body saying? What does it feel like? What does it feel like in your head? What does it feel like in your stomach? How does your like, do you feel relaxed? Do you feel jittery? All of these things, I think it's really important to tune in when you're hungry. And I also have people say to me, I get home from work and I'm just famished and I have to eat whatever's in sight. And I encourage people to understand that they're not going to fall apart. They're not going to die because they're hungry. So have a glass of water and sit with it and start to experience what it feels like to be hungry, because a lot of times people don't really know. They've never really experienced true hunger, or if they have, they've defied it or ignored it. And punish themselves for it. And food needs to be, it shouldn't be a game of pleasure or punishment or anything like that. It should just be in sync with your body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. And I think the water is a big piece as well, because a lot of times dehydration is masked by perceived hunger. And a lot of times when we go about our day, we actually don't drink enough water. And a lot of times our body just sends us signals to say, hey, drink some water as hunger. And then what I find myself is when I drink a big glass of water, the hunger pangs actually go away. My body was just saying, look, we need water.
The other thing that I think that equally as important as water is sleep. So a lot of time people are actually completely fatigued and they need to sleep, and they mistake that for hunger. A lot of times hunger cravings or cravings and feelings of hunger are really a sign that you're fatigued and you need to rest. You need to go to bed.
Where cravings are concerned, certain emotions actually will trigger certain cravings. So in your experience, how does emotional states affect the way we eat?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with women on this, especially women. And emotions are huge. Emotional eating is something we work with a lot. And emotions, usually we've learned at some point in our lives, and it's usually when we're young, when we're children, to self-soothe with food. And whatever your situation might be, oftentimes we were in a situation as a young person where we were maybe looking for a way to nurture ourselves, right? And the easiest thing to find in order to do that was to eat, and it's usually comfort food, right? The wrong stuff, the stuff we really shouldn't be eating. And I think what's really important here is that women are so hard on themselves, and I'm sure men too, are so hard on themselves for eating in order to soothe their emotions. And yet, if you really think about it, that child that started to reach for the chocolate or the candy or the goodies or the pastries because they were lonely or sad, or whatever their emotional state was, that was pretty resourceful. What a resourceful thing to do. And so could we just, instead of being angry at ourselves for that, could we just kind of honor that child actually came up with a solution that worked when they were little, but it's just not working anymore. It's not getting us to our goal. It's not helping us be the version of ourselves that we want to be. So now we just have to figure out what we can do instead. Like, how are we going to self-soothe? It's not food. We need something, but we don't need, the chocolate cake or whatever it is that we would normally reach for. So I think the first thing is to be compassionate with ourselves, understand that it was actually a strategy that we implemented at some point in our lives that was actually a workable, functioning strategy that helped us, but it's not sustainable and it doesn't help us now. So what can we do instead? And understand that it's not the food. So we do things like we'll invite women to practice something like a pattern interrupt. So if they know that at 4:00 every day they come home and they're bored or they're tired or their kids are driving them nuts or they're whatever else is going on, maybe there's some stress or some grief or trauma or sadness, whatever that is, if it comes up and you normally go for food, ask yourself what you can do instead. So set something up ahead of time so you have a plan, because it always takes us by surprise, even if it's every day at 4:00 or even if it's every morning at 11, whatever that is. Have a plan, even though you know it's going to happen at a certain time. If you know what you're going to be doing instead at that time, it's really going to help you. It's going to arm you with a better strategy, a better solution. So it could be a pattern interrupt. And then what I ask women to do is to ask themselves what they could do instead. So what is it that you can do instead? What do you really need to do? Do you need to call a friend? Do you need to take a bath or go for a run? Or what else can you do that's going to soothe the emotional struggle?
Yeah, I know women are very, very hard on themselves, especially where societal norms are concerned, because, women are forced to fit into this specific mold. And what actually happens is that they just end up not loving themselves and looking in the mirror and not accepting who they are and constantly finding fault with how they look. So where that's concerned, what have you done to help your clients who, for example, look in the mirror and say, I don't like this bit there, I don't like that bit there, and just really not appreciate the beauty that they have?
It's really easy to tell somebody you've got to love yourself because they know they don't. In a lot of cases, women hate their body. And I did too. There was a time in my life when I hated my body and hated parts of my body more than other parts. And so it's a journey and a process, and it's a personal development, and it's a path that we take that is all based on being more compassionate with ourselves and kinder. And let's face it, we all have goals. And if you are beating yourself up and hating on yourself and hating your body, you already know that doesn't work. That strategy doesn't work. If it would work, if it was going to work, it would have worked by now, right? So what's kinder? What's more enjoyable? Well, of course, having a good relationship with your body is. And so instead of me saying to somebody, you've got to just love your body, because of course we know that's the end goal, but that's just not where people are at. We've got to meet them where they're at. So what about if we could just identify some really amazing, miraculous parts of you, right? Eyes that see, a heart that's beating, lungs that breathe, legs that carry you, hands that let you do things. So let's just start to celebrate the parts of our body that that are absolutely miraculous. There are lots of them. Ears that let you hear, a mouth that lets you taste food and talk. So just so many things, right? So many things. And the other part to all of that is that we have to understand that we have to start balancing our brain. So, most of us have these loops that are playing over and over and over again in our head, right? The negative self-talk, the stories, the self-limiting beliefs, and the behaviors that just play on autopilot in our head. We have to start paying attention to that. And so if we identify that we have to start paying attention to what's going on in our brain, and sometimes we need to balance our brain. Maybe we need a better omega ratio, 3-to-6 ratio. Maybe we need to find other ways to balance our brain. If it's more sleep or more water or these other things that we can do. There's lots, but the whole point here is that let's stop blaming ourselves. Let's decide that we might not love our body right now and here today, but that we can learn to be at one with our body and appreciate it with all of its flaws. There isn't a perfect body out there. We've got to get to a point where we just honor ourselves and love our body. It's a process and it's going to take some time. So let's start small and celebrate the small pieces and get ourselves into a place of balance so that we can actually get there.
I love it. Just be kind to yourself, slow down. And I think sometimes it also takes surrounding yourself with good people, because sometimes your environment and your friendship groups could really be bad for your mind and your emotions, isn't it?
I know that even it starts in middle school, right? Girls start talking badly about their body, and other little girls see it and hear it, and so they start talking badly about their body, and it's just a really bad. So I encourage women to find companionship and support and sense of community amongst other women who are on the same path.
Love it. So I want to shift gears to healthy aging as well. I'd love to get your take on what you define as aging.
I do think it's a number. I think that we have to celebrate every age, and we have to keep moving, and we have to honor. It just goes back to honoring the body and honoring the whole, body, mind, and spirit, and understanding that today is a gift. No matter how old you are, we don't know what's happening tomorrow for anybody, no matter how old you are. And the aging process is something that we all get to experience if we're lucky. And it's not too late to do anything. The only thing I think people are really worried about when it comes to aging is not having achieved what they wanted to, right? So you've got to understand that everything that you want to achieve is still achievable. And taking care of yourself is something obviously seems to become more important as we get older, because we can really feel, when we didn't get enough sleep. When we were younger, we could probably get away with some of that and not really notice if we were tired. we can really tell if we're dehydrated. We can really tell if we haven't been eating properly. These things show up in our quality of life and how we feel. So it's about feeling well and giving ourselves the right fuel, being kind to our body, being kind. It keeps coming back to being kind and compassionate with our body. But, you know, living in your purpose, having a purpose and knowing why you're here, doing good work, being in service, being grateful, and having a well-rounded life where that's really rooted in love, and understanding what your legacy is. So aging is something that's happening. The wrinkles are going to come. They're coming. It doesn't matter what kind of cream I buy, Luke. It's happening. The best thing I can do is get a good night's sleep, drink lots of water, and eat more kale. That's pretty much it.
Simple: kale, water, and sleep. That's
Yep.
a 101 prescription for healthy aging. And you mentioned a purpose piece, because I think purpose is something that's fascinating because it's fleeting. You know, people always want to look for purpose in life, and you know, at this day and age, and sometimes we're on this hamster wheel of, okay, I need to rock up to work, I need to drop the kids off at school, I need to do this and do that, and to find purpose is just such a abstract thought. So for someone maybe in that scenario where they're just working and they want to have a sense of purpose, what would you say to them?
I do believe we all have a feeling of wanting to have purpose. We want to be here for a reason. We want to somehow contribute to humanity. And I think our purpose really comes down to what we give back and how we serve humanity, or the world, or the earth. You know, maybe it's the animals, maybe it's the planet, maybe it's human beings. But I think our purpose is different for everybody. It's a journey for all of us to find out what it is. And it's about making a difference in some way, right? We want to make a difference. So I think that the best thing to do is to just sit with it and I think about where you would like to make a difference. Your soul's purpose, or your purpose here on planet Earth, doesn't mean you have to become a celebrity and make $1 million and so that you can make a difference. For some people, it's raising their children. You know, for some people, it's writing a book and taking a stand for something that's important. I think it's about sitting with it and knowing what's important to you. Is it people? Is it the state of our planet? Is it global warming? Is it animals? And just identify what's most important. And I think that two things. I think if you listen to that inner voice about what's important, you just follow that and you'll find your purpose. And the other thing is, I think that if you're really struggling, go back to your childhood. I encourage people to go back to when they were a little kid. And what was it then that you loved, that was important to you then? And I really believe that at the core of who we are, we're still back there. We're still 5 years old. We're still 6 years old. And we do really know what's important to each and every one of us. So, I mean, if you don't know now what that is, what your purpose might be, if you can't really identify it, go into a younger version of yourself and think about what was important to you then.
And I remember when I was like 13 or 14, I loved going to the gym to train, and funnily enough, that's what I love doing, and that's why I do what I do. And finding purpose for me was firstly advocating this lifestyle through, you know, the summit and all competing and things like that. And now having a little Sienna, my little girl, it's about her and what kind of world that she'll see when she's older, when she's a mother, when she's a grandmother. So it's one of those things where I find purpose just shifts to a certain degree as time goes on, but the constant is it's about service, something greater than yourself. So going back to what you said earlier, the trifecta of healthy aging: kale, water, and sleep. You know, so the trifecta there. I wanna go diving back into nutrition. How does food affect the way we age? And maybe I would say animal protein if we want to go into specifics.
Mm-hmm. So what comes to mind is the work that Dean Ornish did. He found that when people went on plant-based diet, that their telomeres actually got longer. Telomeres, they actually got longer. So, and of course that the telomeres, these little pieces at the end of our chromosomes, get shorter as we get closer to death. And they haven't seen them get longer. So in this instance, they actually saw them get longer when people turned to a plant-based diet. Now, I think they were doing some other things. They were doing some yoga and some movement, and so, there's that sort of whole holistic approach. But I mean, the food plays a huge role there. So, when you're eating foods that are, first of all, dead, right? You're eating dead flesh. I don't know how you could imagine you could thrive and get younger by eating something that's dead. It doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, I think eating living foods rich in vitamin C and phytonutrients and fiber, all of these things that are vital to health, they are the things that in every instance are known to keep us youthful and strong and help us to maintain muscle mass. We know that in aging populations, animal protein actually decreases muscle mass. It causes atrophy. They found that greens like fenugreek and some other greens can actually increase or sustain muscle mass in the elderly. So, there's this natural atrophy that happens as people age. It's thought to be caused by animal protein. So definitely, eating fresh fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole plant foods are beneficial to our health. But not only are they beneficial to our health, they actually improve our longevity. We've seen that in the centenarians, right, in the blue zones. So and the dead animal products that are really devoid of nutrients, aside from the macronutrients like protein and fat, they don't offer us much. They just don't.
You did a video a while back about methionine as well. Maybe you could expand a little bit on what methionine is, firstly, and secondly, how it contributes to maybe accelerated aging.
There's an actual cancer protocol to reverse cancer by restricting methionine. And methionine is actually, we need it. It's an amino acid that's found in our body. It's found in meat in larger quantities. And so when there's this idea that they can turn cancer growth off by restricting methionine, what that essentially means is eliminating meat. So they take meat out of the diet, and then they've automatically taken the methionine out of the diet, and they can reverse some cancers in this way. Pretty extraordinary. So we know that methionine is, of course, we need some of it. We need a little bit. We just don't need a lot. And the more of these things that we get, the more detrimental to our health they become. Our tissues start to break down, and disease sets in.
I love it, Margot. So I think just as a wrap up, for the woman or person out there that's struggling with not accepting who they are, struggling with their weight, just feeling a little bit depressed, what would you say to them? What would be your one nugget of wisdom to them, just to take control of their lives and and their impact in the world?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm so glad you asked me that, Luke. I just heard this today. We are like a clay on a potter's wheel, And we're not finished yet. You know, we are a work in progress. We get to be at peace with who we are right now. This is part of our journey. We're all improving. There is a plan. There is always room for growth. We all have something to work on, something to improve upon, and we're going to get there. But we all have a starting point or a midpoint. Wherever you are in your journey, it's just fine. You need to celebrate it, be at peace with it now, and then you get to embrace the journey. But if you see this as an impossible road that you are, just struggling on, and it's always a struggle, it's never going to be fun, and you probably won't get there if you have that mindset that it's too hard, it's not fun, you can't, So can we just stop with the self-limiting talk, the negative talk? Celebrate who you are right now. Be at peace with who you are right now. And know that there's room for improvement. There's room for growth. And if you can embrace yourself and where you are and be at peace right now, then I believe that you can have this mindset that you are just clay on the potter's wheel. You are growing. You are changing. It's all going to happen, but it has to start with more compassion for yourself and a sense of inner peace and letting go of the negative beliefs and the thoughts in your head.
Love it, Margot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luke, for having me. It's always great to chat with you.
Indeed, it's a pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. A wise man once said, "You make a new life by making new choices." Now, if you know that what you eat matters, if you know that health comes from healthy living, then the time to make new choices is now. And just imagine owning the summit for life. Click the button for more. Maybe you know our stories. Luke and I lost family to cancer, and we wish we would have known sooner what you are learning here today. So please, share the summit, take action, and let's support each other. Thank you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we can't wait to see you for the next presentation.